Right. Yeah. Good morning, everybody. As Pete said, most of my professional life has been spent in the education of school-age children, which has given me many insights into the way in which they learn. Sorry, I'm going to hold this up a little bit, otherwise I'm not going to be able to see it. I do apologise. And in that experience, I have discovered that there are exceptional individuals that find the process very easy, almost as to the extent that perhaps they didn't need education at all. Perhaps that's a bit of a heresy to say that. But I've always wondered at those children that show precocious talent and wondered at its origins. When I first started teaching in the 1960s, much of the staff room conversation was around the culture of the classroom, the unwritten rules and mores which existed often unnoticed by children and teachers in particular. I remember one particular lunchtime we were discussing what gave individual status in the classroom. An elderly practitioner who was paying a somewhat jaundiced attention interjected. Two things, he said, give children status in the classroom: if they can draw and if they can play football. And I'm not too sure about the second one. This Amadeus notion of artistic ability is not a popular one with educationists these days, because giftedness implies something given, a gift. And in terms that describe exceptional ability, they are very convenient. The terms prodigy, talent, genius, are these incremental? Does one lead on to the next? More importantly, what are the factors that can transform talent and ability in children into something a little more? That word again, genius. Or are they, like Mozart, Amadeus, touched by God? As a young teacher, I soon became aware that some children could draw and paint better than others. Although better is, of course, a loaded phrase, in the culture of the classroom, it was children that usually use this word. And children's judgments are invariably based on common sense criteria. When Julie draws a horse, it looks like a horse. But the children were aware that Julie had a special ability. So where were the origins of this talent? Family background, inspirational teaching, unusual self-motivation, or perhaps a combination of all three. As in the culture of the classroom, there has to be a culture for art, an incentive that can develop the talent, the acquisition of a special ability. Last year, I spent some time researching the stories of emigre artists from Eastern Europe who, escaping from poverty and persecution, lived and worked in Britain in the 20th century. One amongst these came from a family of impoverished Polish Jews who arrived in the East End of London at the end of the 19th century. They had a talented son. His name was Mark Gertler. At the age of 17, he produced this. There was no unusual artistic ability in the Gertler family. However, there was a mother that recognised a spark in the drawing of her young son, who introduced him to supportive cultural groups in the area and managed to get him noticed by a leading promoter of young artists of the time, William Rothenstein. However, in Gertler, there was another factor in the equation. Like Dickens, he was determined to escape from poverty of the East End. He practiced, sought advice from anyone who was prepared to give him their time, spending hours in the National Gallery copying out still lifes like this one. And eventually, he took the initiative of turning up at William Rothenstein's house in Hampstead with a bunch of canvases under his arm. Rothenstein was amazed at the pictures. The Gertlers received a letter from Rothenstein telling them he had an exceptional son. The boy from Whitechapel was on his way. But the key to this fact from a very early stage was that Gertler's horses were looking like horses. In a talented individual, there was always the spark, the natural ability, if you like. But somehow, somewhere, this spark has to be kindled and a fire lit. When new material, like from an established artist like Evelyn Dunbar, turns up, it creates an opportunity to reappraise, review, and reconsider their work. In terms of the subject I was researching, I was on the lookout for this early spark. I would like to say at this juncture, I draw upon Christopher Campbell House's definitive biography on Dunbar, which provides much of the context of this call. My apologies to him for any personal howlers in my findings and thinkings. Dunbar was 16 when she drew this. I'm defining Juvenilia as artworks of the juvenile, i.e. the teenage years, 13 to 19. For many artists, these works are produced before any formal education in art begins. In Dunbar's case, her teenage years were between 1919 and 1925. Much of the material I've drawn on is taken from sketchbooks, which arrived at the Oxford Centre here, as Tom told us, in 2021. But, as we have heard, in a considerably damaged state. However, from the material that has survived, we have evidence that Dunbar had an ability to draw and paint in a representational manner from a young age. They also give clues as to where this facility came from and how it was honed. Like musicians and footballers, a talented individual often emerges in the context of a family where one of its members is particularly adept, often the mother and or the father. From then on, they pick up techniques and disciplines, tricks, tips. When a child recognises they are good at something, they can often adopt a very positive attitude towards it, principally because they feel and enjoy, as we all do, succeeding. When that notion is reinforced by an adult or adults, they gain in confidence, as well as expertise. Practice and precision are often the elements of this early learning. And once some level of expertise is achieved, it can produce, not always, but it can produce a platform for the imagination. The individual then has an opportunity to develop and expand their skill through friends and families and interested individuals. They begin to know they are good at it, and this knowledge is culturally reinforced. In Dunbar's case, the culture is art. Evelyn Dunbar was born in Reading in 1906, the youngest of 6 children of William and Florence Dunbar. Her father was a Highland Scot, born in Speyside in 1862. His family were country people, and he worked initially as a farm labourer in Scotland, but William was a boy with ambition, and by his late teens, he has made his way to England and the tailoring business. By the time he married Florence Murgatroyd in the mid-1890s, he'd become established as a modestly successful businessman and entrepreneur. After his marriage, he expanded his business interests into a range of areas in the textile retail business. He was now in a position to start his family. This photograph, taken about 1924, shows William in his 60s with 2 of his daughters. Jessie is on the right and Evelyn is on the left, and she's about 18 in that picture. It's an affectionate image of a man at ease with his daughters. In this photo, he is corpulent, late middle-aged, with all the paraphernalia of a successful middle-class businessman, complete with buttonhole, bow tie and watch chain. On the back is inscribed Lord Le Dunbar and his 2 charming daughters. Pictures of William appear regularly throughout Evelyn's early sketchbooks and later in paintings up until the time of his death in 1932. The earliest I could find was this sketch made about when Evelyn was about 14. In this drawing, William has removed his jacket and he seems to be contemplating something, perhaps a job he's working on, or perhaps a conversation with someone. Whatever it is, it can't be too arduous, for he keeps his hat on. This sketch has been made quickly, but the proportions are accurate, and Evelyn captures the relaxed pose. The profiled head is managed with minimal attention to eyes and mouth, yet the image is clear and precise. A slightly later portrait of a father. Evelyn by this time was about 15. Again, an affectionate image, and by all accounts, he was a kind and benevolent man. He was not, in inverted commas, sociable, dedicating his time to business. But in later life, he enjoyed a drink, whiskey of course, he was a Scotsman, went to the golf club to play the occasional round, or stayed at home. And when he had fulfilled his 70 years and 10, he died. He left his family well catered for his business ventures had been largely successful. However, he made little contribution to what we might call the cultural side of the family. There is a contrasting parallel here. Another artist in their teens drew a picture of their father. Picasso was 14 when he did this drawing of his father. Picasso too was prolific and talented at a young age and kept sketchbooks and made drawings and paintings. Picasso here draws his father with the paraphernalia of his own business, his palette and his tools and his brushes, his artistic trade, for he was a painter specialising in birds and animals and still lifes in the area of Malaga where he lived. And Jose taught his son techniques in drawing and painting. And when he had expanded these, he rented him a studio for his own use. Jose was not a successful painter himself, but he recognized the talent in his son. And his father, he was clearly an influence on the young man. Picasso learned techniques and practices from him. He laid a foundation on which Picasso, as we all know, was to build a remarkable career. Yeah. Clearly, Don Jose was a very, very different father from William. For artistic influence on Evelyn, we must look to the other parent, her mother, Florence. This small watercolour appears in one of Dunbar's early sketchbooks and was made when she was 15 or 16. It's on show in the Glasgow room here. She has over-elaborated the managed pose with a slightly inclined profile and the eyes shut. It's a little too textbook in some ways, but the image is beautifully painted, from the packed curl in the hair to the blush on the cheek. Campbell Howe's biography describes the closeness of the family unit and the pleasure in family life, and this comes through very strongly in Evelyn's work. There was a significant female presence centred around Florence, for the women in the family seemed particularly close. The essence of it was the warm and comfortable, with everyday life taking up most of their time. This again is reflected in this watercolour. This is another watercolour from the same sketchbook. Sadly, it's badly damaged with damp and staining. But it's an interesting composition, for she's made a back view of herself and her mother wandering amongst the stalls and cabinets of a department store. It's difficult to know when and where the commonplace became a feature of her work, but like many artists of her day, its subject matter became a hallmark of the most successful application of it in her later war art. This is another early watercolour from the same sketchbook. It seems that Florence Dunbar had two great interests, gardening and watercolour painting, the one dovetailing into the other. Again, it's a commonplace picture of our mother going about her everyday task, complete with basket and dibber. However, the composition does look contrived. Florence is posed with a solemn, patient look on her face, waiting for Evelyn to get the sketch over so she can get on with her weeding. She is also dressed in a most ungardening-like way, well, but perhaps typical of the day, perhaps. Her shoes sparkle, and her flowered hat seems something of an adornment. Perhaps more typical is the drawing from Evelyn's sketchbooks. This is an earlier study. Again, Evelyn is about 15 at the time. It's Florence in the garden again, but a much quicker and more spontaneous sketch. Dunbar is looking at body shape and posture, the arms and legs in a position suggesting the effort required to pull a particularly stubborn weed out. She's a young artist practicing her craft, endeavouring to make the subject live and be real. Although managed very quickly, probably less than a couple of minutes, I suggest she succeeds in producing a clear, convincing sketch. Florence's passion for the garden manifested itself in other passions, in particular watercolour painting herself. She specialised in flower still lifes and showed her pictures at the local Rochester and West Kent Art Society. Those that survive are testament to her keen eye and her simple, uncomplicated technique. Florence and Evelyn's love of painting meant inevitably the mother introduced the daughter to painting at a young age. And as this study shows, by the age of 16, she had mastered the basic techniques and could bring individuality to her pictures. I'm afraid I failed to discover who Mimi was, perhaps a doll, but this is a guess. This small head sketch of an Oriental child is exquisitely executed. The brushwork is delicate and precise, and the eyes, in particular, are mere suggestions in paint, but full of life and expression. The details, like the red bow in the hair, are managed with supreme confidence. Again, Evelyn Dunbar was 15 or 16 when she painted this. I unapologetically now refer to a quote from Christopher Campbell Howes' biography, for he writes about Evelyn, thinking about herself and thinking about herself as an artist. He writes, "It became clear by the time Evelyn was 8 or 9 that the family's youngest member was unlike her siblings. She could draw extremely well and loved drawing. She became aware of her individual status, even to the extent of later referring to herself, with undoubted humility, as a cuckoo in the nest, or as one with special responsibilities in the stewardship of her gift." The biographer hesitates before daring to write "must have" in the absence of documentary evidence for any proposition, but Florence must have been excited and gratified to find in her youngest child this rare gift. At any rate, it was never stifled or suppressed in any way. As mentioned earlier, Evelyn was the youngest of 6 children. The sibling that features most in her early pictures is her sister Jessie. She was always seemed to be a willing subject for her artistic younger sister, which is rather curious, but a bit more of this later. Images of Jessie are a recurring motif in Dunbar's early and later work. This is one of the earliest survivors, drawn when she was about 16. Her subject has been arranged for the purposes of being drawn. There is a strong suggestion of the domestic, shoes off, shopping bag slung over the back of the chair. Jessie seems to be warming herself in front of a fire at the rear centre of the picture. Very shadily drawn, but there is a hint of it if you look carefully. However, there is another factor in the composition of this picture, with the sitter's head deliberately turned away from the artist. Jessie had a squint that she was very sensitive about, which is why Evelyn never drew or painted her full face. Her sister, Marjorie, nicknamed Midge, was even more challenging, having a lupus, which she continually arranged so that she continually arranged her hair to conceal. Evelyn worked hard to ensure that her sisters were always shown in a favourable light. There follows 3 slides from what was probably a later sketchbook. As Evelyn got older, and she was about 18 when she drew this, it seems she began to be more focused on the practice of her art, taking more time to observe and concentrate the detail. This study and the next 2 all appeared on the same page of the sketchbook and were clearly drawn at the same time, but perhaps probably within an hour or 2 of each other. This head and shoulders study is an unflattering one of Jessie, yet one suspects the lowered eyes and slightly parted mouth captured the sitter's attitude and satisfied the artist. This hand study has a lightness that is rarely achieved by a young artist. The paper sits in the hand, the thumb secures it, and there's a suggestion of a forefinger steadying it. The capturing of the face seems on outward appearances to be effortless, and portraits seem to be very much Dunbar's preoccupation at this time. Jessie's depiction of her sister changed little over the years, as this later portrait shows. This is a mature painting by an accomplished young artist, but there is still a sensitivity towards the subject, which recognised the fact of Jessie's still having that self-consciousness. Once again, her sitter is sombre, slightly reticent, not seeming to be someone enjoying the process of being painted. However, back to the 1920s and young Evelyn's life in Kent. In the early 1920s, the family were living in 224 High Street, Rochester, where Jessie and Marjorie were managing a children's shop in the High Street. Such was the success of William's business ventures that in 1924, the family moved to a much grander detached house, again in Rochester, called the Cedars. When Evelyn was 11, she won a scholarship to Rochester Girls' Grammar School and was fortunate in that the school had a tradition for excellence in the arts, painting and drawing in particular. The art master, George Ward, was a Royal College of Art man and a key figure in the local Rochester School of Art. He broadened Dunbar's horizons in terms of technique and subject matter, and provided yet another element in the culture of art that was becoming a major influence upon her. When she was in the lower 6th, she produced this. She called this picture Girl with a Birdcage. It shows Jessie in the interior of 224, and in many ways encapsulates the simple pleasures of family life and the family going about its daily routines, things that were so important to Dunbar and became such a feature of her later art. I once again defer to Christopher Campbell Howes, who writes of this painting. Girl in a Birdcage is set in the scullery of 224 High Street, and the subject is Jessie, again, who has just brought in an armful of tulips, daffodils and forsythia. A pale spring sunshine is flooding the room, and Evelyn's handling of light is more than competent. Jessie is perched on the edge of a large earthenware sink, filling a jug with water for flowers. There are more bowls and pots beneath the sink. The spring sunshine has encouraged the canary in the cage to start to sing. The water will be gurgling into the jug and may be overflowing if Jessie does not pay attention, because Evelyn's brush has caught her sister when she too is singing. A footnote to this picture comes again from Campbell Howes, who discovered that this was the earliest of her pictures to be actually bought by a gallery in 1934. This was under the inspiration of William Rothenstein, who made the deal with Carlyle, I think, and he was then principal of the Royal College of Art. The Dunbar family was typical in many ways of its time and its class, so it's unsurprising that a family pet should feature in the sketches of Evelyn. It's even less surprising that it should be a dog. And here he is. The affection of children for animals seems to be a feature of our human condition. And when this is coupled with artistic talent, they invariably become the subject of many sketches and drawings. They are also a test of artistic prowess. The Dunbar family dog was called Laddie, and he features in many of the family photographs. Here, Evelyn sketches him sleeping in the lap of one of her sisters, or perhaps it's Florence. Whoever it is has a firm grip on him, ensuring that Evelyn gets a good opportunity to capture her subject. Again, although still a teenager, this quick sketch shows all the hallmarks of an accomplished artist. Though the dog's body is scrunched up, the shape is clear, and the lap of the woman provides a comfortable place for it to reside. The hand resting over is beautifully achieved with the subject and the mere hint, a suggestion of a closed eye. Of course, drawings of dogs can only be properly made when the animal is still. And the occasion of sleep is one of the few times that this happens, hence these two quick sketches. The cross paws make it a very attractive pose. Middle-class girls and horses are something of a cliche, so much so that I won't dwell on it. But it has been argued that the 20th century, the royal family set the trend for this, and certainly horses were very much part of county and country life. They are also a favourite for artists and one of the many yardsticks to discerning artistic quality. These quick sketches by Dunbar showed the level of confidence she had achieved by this young age. She has applied a brown wash to the horse and just focused on the legs and body, but the proportions and arrangements are very fine, and she captions the essence of the animal. It reminded me of way back, that child in my class. Her horses looked like horses. Throughout her childhood and teens, Dunbar entered and won many painting and drawing competitions, both local and national. This is clearly at the pushing of her mother, but perhaps also Mr. Wald, the art teacher, who recognised her talents. This picture is typical. She submitted this particular painting for the Royal Society exhibition in 1922 when she was 15. The head teacher added a rider on the back of it with "not copied directly, but made from illustrations." She was determined to underline Evelyn's, underline Evelyn's individuality. It is precision and detail to the fore here. The subject, not one perhaps that she would have chosen, but one that could show off her skill to adults. The support and culture of the school is underlined again by the art department entering her successful for external assessment by the high sounding and highly prestigious National Society of Art Masters, who awarded her honours in still life and illustration and first class in draped figures. Now, this may sound curious and slightly comic a century later, but it emphasises the degree to which Evelyn was encouraged and supported in her teenage years. If she was uncertain about her talent, the awards from societies like these quelled her fears and encouraged her to try more ambitious and demanding projects. At this juncture, I want to touch briefly on a very important aspect of Dunbar's art, her religious belief. She was a Christian Scientist, a creed that was popular in her day and espoused by many artistic circles. The subject will be considered in some depth in a later paper by Jan Cox, but I'm mentioning it now because a Bible story is the subject of one of her early works. It's the story from Luke that tells of the encounter between Jesus and his sisters Mary and Martha. Strangely, Dunbar calls the Christ figure Lazarus, who was the brother of Mary and Martha, and also the name of the name of the man that Christ rose from the dead, but perhaps that's the point. The figures are all in modern dress, and this gives the picture something of a Stanley Spencer feel about it. However, it is not the biblical connotations I want to consider now, but the composition of the picture. The arrangement is in the form of a series of terraces, which gives the picture a layered look. Mary and Joseph are sitting on the second level, while Martha sits on the third, preparing vegetables. The terraces provide a structure for the composition and organise the elements within it. The olive grows on the fourth, the horizons on the fifth. In the foreground, the two characters in it provide the focus. Mary's fascination with the young man, Lazarus enthusiastically recounting, head thrown back, arm thrust forward gesticulating, legs braced, as if he's about to push off. It's an enigmatic piece, and I won't attempt any religious interpretation, but there is a feeling of disturbance. Mary, in the picture, was about her books. Her satchel is open, and its contents spread on the ground. Lazarus has his boots off, but who has disturbed who? Questions that might be addressed later. It is known that Evelyn was a keen participant in school and church life throughout her teens, so it's unsurprising that this provides a subject matter for some of her compositions, like this one. Of all the pictures that I've shown you this morning, I find this one the most indicative. It's the first evidence of a style and composition that would manifest itself in some of her best known works. The subject is a simple one. Four women go about the business of dressing a stage with potted plants for a Sunday morning meeting of a Christian Science group. There is something again of the terrace about this composition. Three of the women work on the ground level foreground. Two are lifting a pot onto the stage. The third is hunched in a kneeling position, head bowed forward, preparing flowers to go in vases. The facing stage demarks a second level. Again, if I had a point or thing, but you can actually see quite distinctly the terraced layers of the picture. Rectangular tiles at the back of the stage provide the backdrop for the picture. It is women going about their business. It is calm, it's orderly, unhurried, like so many of the pictures Dunbar was produced during the Second World War. She was 18 when she painted this. Her school days were coming to an end. For me, this is her final piece of Juvenilia, a goodbye to Rochester Grammar School and the girls of 6A. It's a clever composition, for their backs are turned on the past and they are looking forward into a future which neither we nor they can see. Some are dressed as women, some still as schoolgirls. Their clothes and their back view anonymise them, but they are all shapes and sizes, as young women of the age invariably are. It's a very clever goodbye to all that. I'd like to finish my talk with my favourite image of Evelyn. It's of a young artist in her studio. She has all the accessories, the drawing board, the poised pencil, the easel, and the palette. The palette knife hints that this drawing might evolve into a painting at a later date. It's a wonderful pose, casual, yet concentrated, uncomfortable, yet controlled. Knees up, legs crossed, the eyes are on the mirror, but the pencil is creating the image. After leaving school, she had some unsettled years before eventually taking up a place at the Royal College of Art in 1929 at the age of 23. Dunbar's mature work showed many developmental features that weren't present in her juvenilia. These are art school acquisitions. The religious became more of a feature later, with more than a hint of Stanley Spencer. But like Spencer, she always had that love of the commonplace. Dunbar's World War II painting was the making of her and established her reputation. Many artists show great early potential that is not fulfilled. This is not the case in Evelyn Dunbar. A talent for drawing and painting was evident at a very young age and flourished in a cultural environment that encouraged and supported her. But as well as technical proficiency and a sensitivity to subject, she did have something else, something I've been calling a spark, an original view, something unique that was hers and hers alone. And what can we call it? Well, apparently Sir William Rothenstein knew what to call it. The author, Diana Athol, reported Rothenstein as saying, "I look on Miss Dunbar as one of the most promising of the younger painters. To my mind, she has real genius." There is evidence in Dunbar's Juvenilia of a talented and committed young painter. Circumstances made her into a great one. Thank you very much.